In this lesson, I'm going to show you how to add event listeners. So binding those event listeners onto the different events. And this is where JQuery really comes in and shows its power, because it gives us the ability to quickly select any one of the elements and add some additional functionality and capability to it. So binding those event listeners together. And we don't have to, so even if we're using list items, we don't have to loop through them to add the event listeners separately. jQuery takes care of all of this for us. So we just need to specify the selector that we're using, and in this case we're going to be using click. So essentially click is going to bind the event handler to the JavaScript and trigger whatever event we want to happen. So in this case we've got a function that we're going to write up here and add in and trigger whatever's happening within this function. So let's console log this out for now, and we're going to console log out this object information that's contained with everyone as we click through them, and then later on we're going to update the first name field there, or input field there, with the value that were contained within the list item as we click on it. So let's take a look at this, and now we see whenever we click on it, we've got the output within the console. So let's open up our editor again and add in that we're going to update the value of first name to be equivalent to this value here whenever it gets clicked. So let's make our selector here of our first name. So always remember that. So if we're selecting via ID, so we need to specify it with the hash there, and we're selecting the ID of first name. So we've made our selection, and now what do we want to do with this selection? We want to set the value, and the value is whatever content we're placing in here, and for this case we're placing the value of this object and HTML contained within there. So essentially what's happening now whenever I click on it is outputting into the console, but it's also outputting it for the user's consumption here within the input field. So that's how you make some very basic event listeners. You can also change these as well. So there's a number of different ones. So we've got hover. So let's see how that works out. So now whenever I hover over them, we see that they're changing and they're updating. So this is just another way to access these various elements and make some bound events occur. So there is also another way to list various events together. So I'm going to show you how to do that as well. So let's create, so I'm going to comment this out so it's actually not going to interfere with what we're looking at right now. So this time we're going to do the same list items because we're going to attach these events to all of them, but in this case we're going to use on. And what on does is it allows us to attach more than one event handler or function to the event that's getting selected and clicked. So all of these list items, so we don't have to do list item hover and then list item click. We can do it all within one statement here. So let's set that up and set up the click here. So click. And then here we've got what we want to happen. So this is function. And you can see a lot of the way that we're structuring our code is going to be very similar. So let's, we can actually copy and paste this out. And let's go back out here and see if this is working. So it is in fact working. So now we've got it within this event handler, because remember this is now commented out. And this is an important note that we can't actually use hover within here. So we need to specify another similar type event listener. So we're going to use mouse enter. So it works very similar to the way that we would expect hover to work. So it's catching to see where the mouse is and what's happening with the mouse. So let's add that in, and instead of first name, let's put that output of 1, and instead of VAL, because this is an element, we're going to add inner HTML. So let's get rid of that second one there, save that, and try this out now. So whenever we're hovering over it, we're getting, so essentially it is doing the same thing as the hover, whenever we're on top of it, whenever the mouse is entering the element space, then we see that we're updating that value there. So there's also other ones. So typically when you've got mouse enter, you would have mouse leave, because you're waiting to detect where the user is if they're actually interacting with that element. So maybe over here we can put once that person leaves, then we can update that value. So I need to get rid of that other period there. Take a quick look and just make sure that everything is proper. And for some reason I wrote mouse left, so it's actually mouse leave because that's the correct method. So now we see whenever we leave that, we see that we're getting the value of the element being deposited into these upper. So whenever we're hovering over it, we see that we're getting the values here and here. They're updating and changing, and we still have the click working. So whenever we click, we've got that firing off as well and updating our input. So a lot of interaction here, a lot of things happening, and it was really easy to add these in. And we can see how powerful jQuery can really be and how powerful jQuery gets, because it's just so simple and easy and logical to add all of these event listeners to elements, especially when we're using classes and tags. It just makes it so much easier than JavaScript. So in the next lesson, we're going to look deeper into what we can do with event listeners via jQuery. So that's coming up.